Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Youthman. As you can see, I'm not in my home theater today, but I'm all the way up here in Roswell, Georgia with my friend Alex, and he has got an incredible home theater. It features Trinnov as well as Wisdom Audio. So speaking of Trinnov and Wisdom Audio, I want to give a big thanks to them for sponsoring this video and making this trip possible. So we've spent the past probably couple hours just going through some crazy demos, and I have thoroughly enjoyed my experience so far, and I know we're going to be doing some more. But in this video, I'm going to let Alex kind of walk through his incredible home theater, kind of all the components, and he's even going to share with us some special guests that we've invited today to be a part of this home theater tour to tell you more about what all went into this. And so kind of take us back to, how did you get into home theater? Kind of what was your inspiration going into home theater, as well as maybe what inspired you to kind of go this direction with this particular home theater?
You know, it's funny. So at a very early age, Michael, when I first got into it, it was when DVDs first got started. You know, one of the very first DVD players, it was the Sony DVP S7000. It had the sliding door that used to come out, and then this tray that would pop out. And once the tray popped out, at that point I knew heaven was a real thing.
That's funny.
I mean, it was the most amazing thing to me. So at that point, going from VHS tape all the way into DVT and seeing the resolution changes absolutely boggled my mind. You know, and I hadn't even been a teenager at this point. You know, I was still very young, and I was hooked at that point. So, you know, anytime that I would go and a new DVD would come out, I would go to my parents, begging my parents to go buy anything from, you know, Look Who's Talking to The Exorcist. I know they're completely different ends of the spectrum, right? I mean, I was one of those kids who just loved being frightened, you know, as you can tell by the exorcism. So, you know, with that being said, that was the first thing that started it. And I went from DVDs, and then I started to transition over into things that died out, unfortunately, like the mini disc players. True. You know, and then I started to get into boom boxes. Right. You know, a lot of people, they start, you know, in this hobby, they start with car audio. But for me, it was something much more simple, because unfortunately, I couldn't drive a car. I could sit in one, but I couldn't drive it. Right. So I went from DVDs into mini disc into boom boxes, and that's what started this whole trend. And of course, as I got older and started working, I started looking into two-channel music. Right. You know, and from there, I had always wanted, since I was young, to have my own theater. You know, and now, guess what? Here we are. Absolutely. In my theater, you know.
So with the theater, maybe take us through, let's go around the room and just look at all the components, kind of walk us through the size, all the aspects of it, and let's just take a look together.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to my home theater. Thank you guys so much for being here. You know, the first thing I want to discuss is the room dimensions of my theater. So our theater is 18.5 feet wide, it's 19.5 feet long, and 9.5 feet tall, which comes out to, I believe, a little bit over 3,500 cubic feet. So the first thing I'd like to point out is the passive room treatment. I got this passive room treatment from GIK Acoustics, and they're also out of Georgia. So, you know, I wanted to do some business locally, but they have a phenomenal product. So what you'll see here is you'll see some diffusive panels, you know, and right next to the diffusive panels, you'll see some absorptive panels. And we wanted to make sure that we had just the right amount of diffusive and absorptive panels to make sure that the room didn't get too dead, but also diffused as much sound as possible. You know, and moving on to Wisdom Audio, which is one of the stars of the show, and we also have a Wisdom Audio representative here, Joe Walters, which he is going to discuss the technology behind the line source speaker, and also the dispersion patterns and everything that goes along with how different a line source speaker is from a point source speaker. Then moving on to some of the other audio components back there, we also have a representative from Trinnov Audio, John Heron, which will discuss everything involved with Trinnov and the whole processing. He'll also discuss some of the RO 3D that we're using in our music demos, and also talk about anything Dolby Atmos, kind of that fun stuff that we're all looking forward to talking about, you know. We also have my integrator. He is here. His name is Scott Ross. He owns Atlanta Home Theater. He helped me put everything that you see in front of you together. My audio calibrator will also be discussing everything from our 8 F18 Seaton audio subs to all the passive room treatment and why it's important in this room. Now let's talk about video. Directly above me, we have a JVC NX9 projector, and we also have a Paladin DCR lens that is attached to the projector, and that is all housed in a hush box. And for those of you who don't know what a hush box is, a hush box is made so that way once the projector gets really hot, if it's producing a lot of light, the fans, they tend to speed up, and the faster they go, the more sound it creates. So to keep that noise floor low, we actually put this hush box in here. And the really cool thing about that hush box is because the projector is now dead silent, we can hear all the really cool details from the Atmos speakers and all the surrounds in the room. And now we have my projector screen. This projector screen is from Display Technologies. It is an acoustically transparent cinescope screen, which has a 1.1 gain and it's 140 inches on the diagonal. But I got something even cooler. Check out this trap door. Come on, let's go into my equipment room and look at the electronics we got. In my equipment rack, I have 3 Class D power amplifiers, and these are all from Amplifier Technologies, a company called ATI. Below those amplifiers, I have my processor, which is a Trinnov Altitude 16 processor. And of course, everybody has to have a Blu-ray player. And the Blu-ray player we have in the rack is the Panasonic UB9000. Another video source we have, which is directly below that, is the Kaleidoscape Strato S. And below that, we have a Panamax M5300 PM. And this is our power conditioner that everything kind of plugs into. We have our Control 4 network switch, and that is, of course, to control all the lighting and everything that goes on in the theater. We have our Arachnus network switch that everything plugs into so everything can be on the network. And this is a really cool product right here. It is a Lumagen video processor. I like to look at this as, honestly, like the Trinnov of video. It's like a Swiss Army knife. There's so many cool things that you can do with this processor. You know, just to name one thing is I've got a cinescope screen in my theater, and with that, if you're watching a 16:9 film, let's say something that's like on TV or a YouTube video, you'll see vertical bars on the left and right side of the picture. And what you can actually do is you can program a function there called NLS, which is nonlinear stretch, and that enables you to take that 16:9 picture and make it into a cinescope picture, so that way you fill the whole screen. So moving on from the Lumagen processor, we have the Zapiti Pro 4K HDR player, which is also another lovely player. And below that, we have a Zapiti NAS. Now, what this actually does is it's got 8 hard drives that are built in. They're all 16 terabyte. And you can take all your DVD collection, your Blu-rays, your 4Ks, you can load them up in this disk drive, and it takes anywhere between 30 and 45 minutes to go ahead and back up the disk and rip it to your system, and then boom, you just play it right through this Zapiti 4K HDR. And of course, below that, just to make sure that we keep the system safe in any kind of electrical storms or, you know, unforeseen power outages, we have the Panamax MX5102, which is a battery backup system. With this project, it was so big for me and it's so important that I had to make sure I brought the right team in who could bring my ideas that I put on the paper and they could bring them to life. We have Joe Walters, who is with us, and he's coming in right now, and he is going to discuss the Wisdom audio speakers and the technology behind them. And I've got a lot of questions for Joe myself, so, you know, I'm going to ask him, so hopefully I can get some really, really cool answers about these cool speakers and what they do.
So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Alex, for having us in today.
Absolutely.
Also, thank you for the support for the Wisdom Audio brand.
And thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. One thing I noticed when I came into this room, other than it's a super cool room, and I've seen a lot of rooms, is there was all these little speakers up in the ceiling that aren't Wisdom speakers. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on up in there that doesn't belong to Wisdom Audio?
Yeah, so in my journey to build a theater, I didn't know about anything about speaker placement. I had no idea. I just assumed, hey, you know what? If it's aesthetically pleasing and you can put it up, it makes sound, it's going to be great. But little did I know that putting them up there, that the sound of the theater, things, they transition, they take place in different areas. So I quickly realized after watching a few movies like Ready Player One that that's not exactly how they're supposed to be. So what I did was I quickly put in a phone call to a good buddy of mine, and he referred me to Atlanta Home Theater, which is my integrator. And when he did that, then he helped me put together a plan to really kind of map out how I should go about things to get a proper theater.
Right on. So a couple things about this theater and about Wisdom Audio that are unique. Number one, it's locally built by Scott over at Atlanta Home Theater, which is one of our top dealers in the entire world, really. But some of the technologies that Wisdom Audio offers that are different from other companies is what we call line source and planar magnetic drivers. We're also an American company. We're based in Carson City, Nevada. About 95% of everything that we do is built or manufactured within a couple miles of our factory, which is pretty unique in the business world today as far as electronics go. So I want to talk a little bit about planar drivers and line source, because that's really the two big things that separate Alex's theater from pretty much every theater that you find around the country. So we're going to talk first about line source and planar magnetic drivers. So what is a line source speaker? Well, if you've ever been to a loud concert and you see the big speakers that they have hanging, and they're kind of a curve and they're an array, that's called a line array. The idea behind a line array is that they can spread sound power equally from the front of the room to the back of the room. In the old days when you went to a concert, you had a big stack of speakers, and if you were in the front row, it was like, holy cow, it blew your ears out. If you're in the back row, it was pretty good from a volume level wise. The advantage of using a line source, which is different from a line array but does a similar type of a thing, is that a line source speaker, this is actually your high frequency driver, this big ribbon right here, this planar driver. The advantage of that is that everything that's below this and everything that's above this doesn't come off. It literally comes off of this speaker, the sound comes off like a cylinder. So there's no sound above, there's no sound below. The advantage of that for you and inside of a theater application is that you eliminate about half of the room reflections that you would normally have with what we would call a point source speaker. A point source speaker comes off like a big bubble. So it bounces off the ceiling, it bounces off the floor, it bounces off the walls, and you really have to control all of those extra reflections in the room. The other big benefit, especially for a theater with a line source product, is if you look at a theater, how they're laid out, you never really always get to sit directly in the middle. So if you're sitting in this seat right here, you're much closer to this speaker. With a point source speaker, your ear is drawn directly to that speaker rather than focusing on the center image and what's coming off the screen. With a line source speaker, it loses only half of output for every doubling of the distance of the sound. So the closer that you sit to it, it really doesn't get much louder because you're hearing less of the line source. So one of the other big advantages of a line source and our planar drivers is typically when you have a loudspeaker, the tweeter or the high frequency driver, which is usually about that big around, will only play from maybe 3,000 hertz up to 20,000, so maybe 3 octaves of information. Your ears are most sensitive between 3,000 and 1,000 hertz. What happens is with our line source product, they play all the way down to 350 hertz, so you get a full 6 octaves of information out of that single film of speaker, right? And the film is actually a very, very thin planar material that is actually lighter than the air that it's trying to move to create sound. So it is very efficient, it plays very loud without very much power, and as I mentioned before, as you get further away, you hear more of the speaker, but it sounds almost the same amount of volume depending on whether you're right next to it or whether you're a long ways away. And also the way that a line source works is literally if I'm standing here, my ear is only hearing this little part of the speaker. That's why it doesn't get louder as I get closer. We like to call it the perfect party speaker because when you're in a room with a set of line source speakers, you can literally be having a conversation while the speaker's playing and not have to be like way away the big bubble around a normal type of loudspeaker that's normally playing really loud in a room, right?
And believe me, I've been to many parties, and talking to somebody next to a speaker does not go so well.
It does not,
No.
that's for sure. So the first time, Alex, that you heard your theater when it was dialed in versus the little things that you had in your ceiling before, what was your, I mean, how did you feel about that the first time that you experienced it?
You know, so the best way I can tell you is it felt like I was at an amusement park. It literally felt like I was on a ride. I was so immersed by everything going on in the film, I lost sight of that there was any speakers in the room. I was so involved in the film, and I believe one of the first films that I watched in here was A Quiet Place. And for the first time, I had seen a horror film and actually been somewhat frightened because I was just so into the movie. And that had never happened before because I'm hearing, you know, sounds from where they're supposed to be, but not from the speaker, just from that area where they're actually coming from.
Yeah, it's such a different type of an experience with a line source product versus a point source product. You really almost have to hear it to understand what it's really capable of doing. Another big benefit of a line source speaker is that the dispersion pattern normally on a speaker, you know, it's pretty narrow depending on the frequency, especially high frequency speakers are very narrow. If you think about a flashlight and it's one of those really cool high-end flashlights that you dial it in, there's like a little tiny light, that's what a tweeter would normally do. With a line source speaker, it's a full 180 degrees of dispersion, yet it's not dispersing up to the ceiling or the floor, so you eliminate those reflections, which means you're really getting the direct sound first rather than reflected sound.
You know, now seeing that you're saying that, the bubble seems much bigger in this room. You know, when I'm sitting down, whether I'm sitting, like you said, if I'm sitting here or whether I'm sitting in this seat, the sound does not change, but
Right.
it stays very, very big, which is one of the things I absolutely love about these speakers.
And big, it's interesting that you say big, because our speakers are pretty big. That's a 50-inch tall speaker that's an in-wall product. You know, I love the fact that you don't have the grills on these, but, you know, one of the big things about Wisdom Audio is our speakers are designed to be not seen, right? There's a lot of companies out there that have high-performance loudspeakers, high output, very musical speakers, but they're not designer-friendly, they're not wife-friendly, they're not architecturally friendly. And ours really checks all those boxes because you can have your system completely disappear into the room, but yet have performance like you've got some big, huge boxes in your room. So I'm sure that makes your wife happy too, not having to have all those big, huge boxes in the house either.
Yeah, she gave me one room, and that's it. That's why she's happy.
So one of the things that I love that you did with your room, Alex, is you did Atmos the way Atmos should be done. You know, Atmos is kind of a buzzword in the industry. Everybody wants to have Atmos in their theater. And I get a lot of people that say, well, I'm going to put my LCRs, my left channel, right channels behind the screen. Then I'm going to put my sides and my rears and my Atmos channels up in the ceiling. Well, guess what? That doesn't work. You can't put Atmos in the ceiling and your surround channels in the ceiling because there are certain angles that Dolby says you absolutely have to have. And when I came in here, the first thing I saw was that you got our new 0.2 V2, which is a passive loudspeaker. And it has a planar driver just like this. It's a point source, so it's not a line source. It's a point source, and it's designed to really focus that image right where it needs to be. With Atmos, the angles between these height channels and the surround channels and the main channels really has to be almost perfect for you to get that immersive experience. And what I heard you tell me before is that, you know, watching that show, which one was it again?
A Quiet Place.
A Quiet Place, which I just saw for the first time today on this theater, and it was pretty incredible. To be immersed in that and to have that information seamlessly flow all the way around the room without having a sense of, oh, the sound is coming from that speaker. It's just coming from where it should be coming when you're watching the movie. You have to have everything perfect. And the way that you have these things angled, strapped down, right at the reference listening position is critical. I also hear a lot of people that try to build a theater and they're trying to make Atmos for every single row and every single seat. Well, when you design a theater, you're always designing for one reference listening position. And so you've done a great job with that. Even if you go to a commercial theater that has an Atmos setup, you know, they design it for one sweet spot. Even if there's 400 seats in the theater, it's still designed for one sweet spot in the theater. So to be able to do what you did here and have that angled right towards that reference listening position really, I mean, it really showed in what we did with the demos today.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Just incredible.
And now that we've discussed audio and we're still on the topic, let me bring in my friend John Heron from Trinnov Audio to say a couple words about the Trinnov Altitude 16 that I have in the back.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm kind of curious. How did you first hear about us?
So I heard about you all through the forum. So what's funny is I would always go in the forum and I would look at everybody's like the thread, and I would see their signatures. And one common signature I would see on all the threads was Trinnov Altitude 32 or Altitude 16, and the threads I was looking at. So I got to thinking, you know what? These guys must be onto something. If they all have the same product, you know, maybe it's something that I should be looking at. So that's kind of how I got into Trinnov and how I heard about Trinnov was because of the forums.
Yeah, well, heaven knows we've got a big active audience and frankly cheerleading squad on the forums, and we're very grateful for that. And I think one of the reasons why that is, I mean, the forums are populated by people like yourself who are just really into it, and a lot of them are more do-it-yourself. Some people rely on integrators like Scott, but these are guys who really have put a lot of effort into it, and they figured out what they like, and they come to us because we can simply do a bunch of things that nobody else can do. So it's like, you know, you look at this product and that product, and maybe this one does everything that one does a little bit better. And then there's this sort of quantum leap to the kinds of things that we can do. And it's because the architecture of our product is completely different. Most people are buying off-the-shelf chips from Texas Instruments or Analog Devices or some other company, and then they're putting them on a circuit board and trying, you know, write the software to make them all talk to each other. But the fundamental performance of the system is decided by the guy who designed the chip at, say, Texas Instruments. And those guys, they're in a mass market business. They have to sell a lot of chips to make any money at all, because the first one is so expensive to build. And after that, they can just stamp them out. But they've got to recover that initial investment. So by definition, it's a mass market kind of thing. They're trying to figure out how can we dumb this down so we can fit it on an inexpensive chip that we can sell a lot of. And we just didn't do that. The founders of our company actually developed a really flexible and powerful research platform because they wanted to do fundamental research into how we perceive three-dimensional sound. I mean, that's where the name Trinnov Audio comes from, is tri for three and innov, innovation. So the name from when they incorporated the company in 2003 was, you know, Trinnov Audio was innovation in 3D sound.
I never knew that. That is so interesting.
Yeah. Well, these guys, they came out of graduate school, they're all friends, and like, where can we really make a difference? Because, you know, higher sampling rates and more bits, that was already happening. It's not like you could really contribute anything there. But they were fascinated by the acoustics in general, trying to figure out how can we do this better? How can we capture a detailed three-dimensional sound field in one place with some sort of fancy microphone, and then store it and maybe process it as needed, and then recreate it on a whole bunch of speakers in a way that actually convinces you that you're not in your living room or your home theater, but you're actually wherever that original microphone was. And so they were building on the research that other people had done, but they took it a lot further. And what is at the heart of all of our products today is essentially that same research platform that they built early on. You know, it had to be really flexible so they could try out a lot of ideas and decide which ones worked and which ones didn't and move on. It had to be really powerful because they were doing some really complex, heavy-duty calculations. And they needed to be able to change it kind of on the fly so as to, you know, they couldn't wait for a month to try out a new idea. So it has to be fast, flexible, powerful. And that means, you know, you build it on a computer. And they were scientists, so it was a Linux operating system. Now, as it turns out, Dolby and DTS and all those folks also develop, you know, they're scientists, so they work on a Linux operating system as well. The difference is that because when they send us, for example, what they call the golden code for Dolby Atmos, we can take the code that Dolby themselves say, this is how Atmos is supposed to work, and we can run it natively on our platform. Everybody else has to wait for Texas Instruments, Analog Devices, Cirrus Logic, somebody to come up with a simplified version of Atmos that'll fit on a chip. So way back in 2014, when we introduced the Altitude 32, we were already capable of decoding all 34.1 channels of Dolby Atmos. And here we are in 2021, and we're still the only people who can do that. But it's because that really powerful research platform that's built on what we call the Trinnov OS, which is a lean and mean version of Linux, that allows us to do everything in software. And we're not limited by the decisions that some engineer in Texas made. We can do what we want. We have total control over the software and also total control over our hardware. So we can, it puts us in a position where we can literally do things that nobody else can do.
Now, John, before I was a 2-channel guy, and I had discussed with my audio calibrator, Chuck Gerlach, that, 2-channel is a very big deal to me. And whenever the Trinnov was installed and he came over to calibrate, he said, well, wait until you hear what RO sounds like.
Yeah.
I had no clue what this was.
Yeah.
Could you explain exactly how that works? Because I've always been so curious about how it works and what exactly the best way to, if I'm discussing that with a friend of mine, to tell them what RO is, because I don't know the best way to describe it.
So Oro 3D is one of a handful of what's called an up mixer that we have in the Altitude platform. And the other couple of up mixers are really more designed for movies. And Oro 3D is a channel-based format that also is available for use in movies. But the founder of that company is actually an accomplished professional concert pianist. And Wilfred is, he's an older man now, but as a younger man, he had like 700 paid for professional performances of grand piano. So he came at it with a more music-oriented sensibility. And the up mixer that is associated with Oro 3D, it's actually called Oromatic. For that reason, he was listening to it with a musician's ear. And I can't really describe the inner workings, the algorithms. I don't know all of the hairy math, honestly. But what it sounds like, and one of the reasons why it seems to sound different than like Dolby Surround and DTS's Neural X, is it sounds like when you're listening even to just regular CD, the front stage, it doesn't sound like it's been processed at all. It's, if you turn Oro on and off, what's happening in the front of the room stays the same. So if you have a system that images well, the image is rock solid all the time. But what Oro seems to do is it looks at the random phase information in the room. So, things that have been bouncing around in the room, the reverberation of the room that's in that recording. And I think that what it's doing is it's delaying it ever so slightly to make sure that you hear the front of the room before you hear the surrounds. But it's pulling the ambient information from the recording out and putting it into the room where it belongs. So your focus stays on the front image. It sounds like a live musical performance, but subjectively, when you go back and forth, it's like a really great recording that's happening all the way over there versus music in the room with me. And the musicians are still over there, but it sounds more like they're actually in the room rather than just looking through a plate glass window on a performance.
Yeah, because the best way I could describe it is big.
Yeah.
Big and lively.
Yeah, but natural. It never
very
sounds
natural.
like a bogus echo chambery kind of thing. Because it's
not at
only
all.
using the recording that's in, or the information that's actually in the recording.
And it's funny because, initially purchasing the Trinnov, I was thinking, oh, this is just for movies.
Oh,
but
yeah, no.
little did I know, it does so much more than movies.
We actually got our start in the recording studio business. Way back, the first commercial successes that we had were in 2005, 2006. We'd created that first generation of what we call the speaker and room optimizer, which is our proprietary sort of speaker and room correction thing. And those early versions of the optimizer were sold very successfully into high-end both music and movie recording studios. So, in Nashville and LA, New York, all around the world, a lot of music recording studios. But some of the early customers were people like Fox and the BBC, NHK, which is sort of the Japanese version of the BBC. It's the National Broadcasting Network. A lot of broadcast monitoring facilities, post-production houses, dubbing stages. And the reason these guys were all interested in it was that if you're responsible for mixing a record or a movie soundtrack, you have to depend on your ears. And if the speakers aren't telling you exactly what's really in the recording, you can't do your job. And as one recording engineer who we interviewed, it's on our YouTube channel, Pete Lyman, said, if you can't trust your ears, then you shouldn't be buying any of this stuff. And he's waving at all the expensive recording studio stuff behind him. It's like, if you can't really hear what you're, know what you're hearing, you shouldn't buy any of this, and you shouldn't be working, because you're not helping anybody. The optimizer allows you to hear what's really in the recording, whether it's a soundtrack, music, doesn't make much difference. But we actually got started in, as I said, recording studios long before we got into the movie business. We then segued to commercial cinema. We have a division that does real movie theaters as opposed to home theaters. And we only got into the home theater business in 2014 with the Altitude 32.
Now, is there a lot of difference between the commercial cinema stuff you sell and the stuff that's for home cinema?
As far as the optimizer is concerned, no, they're the same. The Altitude is actually the most complex product we build.
Oh, wow.
Because nobody else uses HDMI. And as we all know, HDMI is the hugely disappointing media interface.
So
it's great when it works, but when it doesn't work, it's a nightmare.
So you're telling me that home theater is always better than your commercial cinema?
Well, if only because you don't have to worry about some jerk sitting behind you talking to his girlfriend, right? You can just turn it up more or shoo the kids out of the room.
I guess that's why we're all here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no telling a jerk behind us to go away and get out of here.
Yeah. You could end up with road rage if you're not careful.
Yeah.
But, so the commercial cinema stuff doesn't have to do the kind of decoding that we do for Dolby Atmos, DTS:X Pro, Oro, etc. When in a commercial theater, the information comes to our processor and it's already been decoded, if you will.
Okay.
But we're responsible for making it sound right in the room, and for making it, a total, I was going to say brain dead, that's not very polite, but to make it really easy for the projectionist to do what he's got to do. Because there's usually one projectionist for a big multiplex, and he's running from theater to theater.
That's good. That's good. So it is just very cut and dry on how it needs to be done. It's there and it works.
Yeah. Well, and there are some on our YouTube channel, again, there's some interviews with owners of movie theaters, and they have kind of the same reaction that home theater owners have, which is, I just heard it, and every word of the dialogue was suddenly easily intelligible. All of the details, the transients just seem to have greater clarity and punch. The bass is there in a way that it's not with the other gear. We're trying to up the game in the commercial cinema business as well as compared to a lot of the stuff that's out there. And it makes a big difference. We see our business growing quite a bit in that area because one trend in commercial movie theaters is to have them a little bit more like, your theater, with really comfy chairs and maybe food and drink service and everything. They have these high-end luxury commercial cinemas. And part of that experience is making sure you got a great picture and great sound, because otherwise people are not going to come back to your theater. I think the days of sticky floors and cheesy popcorn are largely behind us.
You haven't looked under my pillows then.
Oh, well, can't speak to that. So there was one thing that Joe said across the room that I thought I wanted to respond to, and, hesitate to do this because it's not like I'm disagreeing with him, but I can put a little extra information around it. It is always important to, when you're designing a room, as you've done here, to design it with an idea of not only, how big is the screen going to be and how bright is the picture. Obviously, having room acoustic treatment is hugely important. It makes our job so much easier. But there are things that passive acoustics can fix that we can't fix. And there are other things that we can do that this stuff can't do. So they complement each other really well. One of the things that we did to support the growth of the sort of the high-performance home theater business, Arnaud Laborie is our CEO, one of the founders of the company. And he and I started on this little project of writing an updated white paper to help our dealers with, if I've got a single row of seats or maybe 3 rows of seats, or it's an unusually wide room or a very long skinny room, what do I do? How do I design this theater given that you're usually working within an existing space? How do I design it to get the most out of it? So we started this white paper. We thought, we'll knock it out in a few weeks. I mean, we're both busy, but, evenings and weekends. 14 months later, we had this book that was more than 80 pages long. But the idea behind the book is, all of the, whether it's Dolby Atmos, DTS-X Pro, or 3D, all these systems were designed in a laboratory with a single guy sitting in just the right spot, surrounded by some array of loudspeakers that's very specific. And they work great. But that's not the real world. The real world is you have not only the person in the main listening position, but you got people all around them, and sometimes it's multiple rows of seats, sometimes not. How do you design a single theater where you have multiple listeners, unlike that laboratory experience where they're kind of developing the technology? So you have multiple listeners. By definition, most of them are not in the sweet spot. And then you also have multiple formats. And, Auro 3D, Dolby, and DTS, they all kind of agree on where the basic first 7 channels go, the 7.1 that we're all used to. Once you get past that, they can't agree on anything. They don't call them the same things. They don't expect they're going to be in quite the same place. There's some similarities, certainly. But we had to walk through, how do you design a single theater to work for multiple people and multiple formats seamlessly? Because you don't want the poor customer to have to read the fine print on the Blu-ray disc, right? It should just pop in the disc, hit play, it works.
Absolutely.
And so this book turned into this, it's actually become something of a standard. It's been largely adopted by CEDIA in their design standards that they're working on. I'm on a couple of standards committees with them. So there is a way of designing a system. With a single row of seats, it's a lot easier. When you have multiple rows of seats, you need to do a little bit more to make sure that everybody, no matter where they're sitting, is having a very similar experience.
So the more seats, the more complex it gets, because you're having to think about more people being in those seats and hearing that sound.
Right. And so, if you imagine, and this is not, you don't have this problem, but we have a lot of systems where there might be 3 rows of seats and, pretty good sized theater. And if you imagine, like in Ford versus Ferrari, the race car movie. I don't know if you've seen it.
Seen it. Great movie.
So imagine, the F40 flying across the screen from the right channel through the center to the left channel, and then as it goes off the screen, the sound of the race car continues down the left wall, and it just kind of pulls you into the action on the screen, right? Well, if you're in the money seat, right, and the sweet spot, and everything is properly calibrated by somebody like Chuck, and it's all dialed in, it's going to work great. But now, stop to think about the poor guy who's got his ear practically in the left surround speaker. Like, as that car goes off the edge of the screen and then starts moving to the left surround, as soon as any of that car sound is in the speaker that he's only this far away from, that's going to dominate everything that he hears. So he's going to hear the car next to him sooner than you will, because he's closer and it's louder. And then he's also going to hear it stay put. It's going to be too loud when it's right next to him. He's also going to hear it stay put longer, because he'll be hearing that, given that he's so close to it, until it's completely out of that speaker and moved on to the one behind him, right? That's a very different perception of what's going on spatially. If you have a higher speaker count, you can go from the right speaker, the center speaker, left speaker, to the left wide, to what Dolby would call the LS1, and then the LS, then the LS2, and so on, LRS1, LRS, LRS2. You can go nuts, and we can do all 24 speakers around you and another 10 above you, plus LFE, that Dolby Atmos supports if you have a project that is that ambitious. Most people will understand just intuitively that if you have a really big room, you probably need more speakers. What is less obvious is that for any given sized room, whether it's big, small, or in between, as you add more and more seats and the listening area fills more and more of the available space in the room, there are going to be more people around the edges who are way far out of the sweet spot. And that means you also need more speakers. because what it'll do is it'll tie, in this example, the sound of the race car, it'll tie it to very specific locations along the wall so that everybody hears the same movement. And if I'm the guy sitting right next to the left surround speaker, it's going to go from LS1. It's going to be a little bit too loud when it's right next to me because I'm still too close to it. But then it's going to move on right away to the next speaker behind me. And everybody has the same experience. We think that's really important. If it's going to be a family, friends, a Super Bowl night, I don't care what it is. You know, you want everybody to have as much fun as the lucky person in the main listing.
Absolutely, because I mean, all the tickets, they cost the same anyway when you walk in a theater.
That's right.
So everybody should get the same experience.
That's right.
Naturally. And now that we've discussed, you know, line source speakers and also our Trinnov audio processor, I'm going to go ahead and walk over. I'm going to discuss the integration process with my integrator, Scott Ross from Atlanta Home Theater.
Hello, Mr. Alex.
Hey, Scott, how are we doing today?
Doing good.
Good, good, good. So, Scott, I was just in the room just discussing with John Heron and also Joe Walters from Wisdom Audio and from Trinnov Audio, you know, kind of their processors and their speakers and what went into the room. But one thing I wanted to discuss was the integration process and the pivotal role that you served in getting this whole room together.
Well, Alex, I think you made my job very easy because you had an idea coming into this of exactly what you wanted. You wanted to make whatever space you had available down here into something that was going to be extraordinary and didn't know exactly how to do it. I know you'd been through a lot of your own research, and we just wanted to come in and go, okay, let's give you the vehicle to make this happen. So we wanted to give you some things to think about. Okay, if you're going to make your first step, what should we do? We talked about the front speakers. We took out the in-wall speakers that we had behind the screen, put in some larger Sonus Faber floor standing speakers so you could get some good front presence. And then,
what a difference that made.
Yeah, huge difference. We added power. We're just looking at the first principles of physics going, okay, we need bigger drivers, we need more power. So we put in some ATI amplifiers, 500 watts per channel, to run the system. We brought in some bigger guns for the subwoofers with a lot of power behind those, and continued to just tweak the system until we got it to the point where everything was done. And we like to do that from the standpoint of you start out with these, use them for whatever amount of time you need them, get all your money back towards the next thing.
You know, and that was one thing that really helped me out. And I'd never had a dealer where I could trade something in for not 20%, not 50%, but 100% of full value. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Scott was nice enough he said, you know what, I know that you're trying to upgrade these pieces and try to get to that ultimate theater. So he allowed me to actually go in, buy a speaker. He gave me 100% value for that speaker toward my next purchase. Mm-hmm. Not 50%, but 100% full value.
Yeah, we know that we want to have the best theaters in the country all over the place. And if we can do that by allowing you to trade things in and continue to upgrade, then it's a win-win for all of us. So we were really here to say, all right, side channels need to go right there. Hush box should be built this way. Atmos speakers should be angled this way. And just subtle things like that. And you were able to go, well, this is what's important to me. I really want to do the subwoofers and put them in the four corners. You worked with Chuck on some engineering ways of doing things, and we were just here to kind of hold everybody's hands and make sure that you were getting what you wanted. And boy, the result is outstanding.
Yeah. And you know, for me, I'm not a DIY guy, and I tip my hat to all those DIY guys out there. You guys are amazing, because I'm just not very good with my hands. So, you know, I had to count on a really good team, and you know, I'm so thankful that, you know, that I stumbled upon you guys to come to your business, because you have made my job very easy. I mean, it was an absolute no-brainer bringing you guys in.
Well, it's been a heck of a project and a lot of fun. So
absolutely. I can't wait to get started on the next one.
Bringing us in too. Yeah, really.
You know, and one thing is, whenever I would go to other, you know, big box dealers or even other specialty dealers, they simply just sold me products, you know. And one really cool thing that you guys were able to do, and I didn't even realize until I said I needed a hush box, is that you all do specialty projects as well. You came in, and not only did you build me a hush box, but, you know, I don't know if anybody noticed, but on those line source speakers, there's a box built around those speakers, you know, that you guys also built for me. So rather than just providing a product, you guys also provided a solution for me in my space. Mm-hmm. Could you kind of tell everybody about kind of how you go about doing that and like the thought behind it and kind of really getting things geared up and getting, kind of moving forward with a project like this?
Yeah. Well, I think for one, it takes one heck of a team to be able to pull all this together, because it's certainly not just one of us sitting there trying to design all this out. We realized early on that there is huge value in attention to detail. So when we look at the side channels and using L8 eyes for those speakers, we look at the volume of the cabinet that those speakers need to be inserted into so that you get the full value of those speakers. We put a lot of calculation into the hush box to make sure that the temperature never goes above 86 degrees.
That's really cool, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, I could stick my hand in there and come out frostbitten.
Yeah, you have to look at every single aspect of the theater and engineer it down to the nth degree. It's all, quarter-inch sizes for all the tolerances that are in here in order to make these systems perform the way that you expect them to. So CAD is absolutely key with us. We have a full team of engineers that work in CAD and do the room designs, calculate all the angles that we need, calculate all the dimensions, and the end result kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, the end result is amazing, and wait until we fire this thing up. A really cool thing about this theater is, and one thing I didn't realize, I've got control for it throughout my whole home.
So we're in Alex and Maria's home, and in this particular area, we have programmed automation and used a setting called Relaxing Evening. So I would say to Alexa, turn on Relaxing Evening. And as you see, there are shades starting to drop in the keeping and breakfast area. And at the same time that is occurring, you've got a lighting scene that is starting to fade up to sort of an early evening scene. The station Cool Jazz cues up right in time with all these changes, and then the final punctuation is the formal living room fireplace turns on to set the mood for the relaxing evening.
And, Scott came and said, what we could do is, whenever you hit play on a movie, we could have all the lights dim in your theater, which I didn't even realize was possible. Or we hit pause, some of the lights, they come on and it gives you an opportunity to get up, see what you're doing, maybe walk to the bathroom. And these are all those little details that I did not realize that could be done in a theater, that really make for an absolutely memorable experience. Right. So every time that I watch a movie, even if I just hit pause or stop and things come on, it is so memorable because I get a full experience. It's not just hitting stop, looking for a remote, wondering how long it's going to take to get the lights on, and maybe getting up and walking into something or walking into a wall, because sometimes I can be a bit clumsy, but that's another story. You came in and you integrated everything that I didn't know I needed, but became very useful.
Yeah, how many times do you sit down here in the middle of a movie and you're like, but you sure as heck don't want to have to get up and go anywhere. We don't want a thermostat somewhere in the room with a display, so we put a remote temperature sensor in the wall, hide the thermostat, and now that's on the system. So it's all the little details that make a theater into a reference type theater like this experience is.
Yeah, it's really cool because what you don't see that was going on are things that you guys were working on all the time, which was really cool.
Yeah. Well, it's been a fun project.
Oh.
Sure have enjoyed working with you.
Like I said, Scott, we'll do it again.
Absolutely.
Next time it's on your dime.
Absolutely.
Now, beyond video processing, we also have my audio calibrator here, which he's going to discuss our 8 Seaton F18 subwoofers that we have in the room. He's going to discuss all the passive room treatment and how you pull everything together and why there is no replacement for displacement. And he'll explain exactly what he means by that. All right, now on to audio calibration. Now that we have talked about speakers from Wisdom Audio, we've discussed the Trinnov processor, and we've also spoke to my integrator. Now I want you guys to meet my buddy, Chuck Gerlach, who is also my audio calibrator, who helped dial this whole room in. So, Chuck, could you kind of tell us exactly like what's involved in the calibration, what's kind of important in getting the room together, like how important maybe the passive room treatment is, and how important it is to have, as many subs as I have?
Those are great points. Room treatment is clearly the most important element you can put in a room. It's more important than the Trinnov processor. It's more important than whatever speakers you put in there or amplifiers. I've been in a number of rooms where there was literally none, and it's a complete waste of time or energy to try and play anything in a room like that. Not everybody can do what Alex has done here, which is do it right from the beginning, but at the very least, passive room treatment applied at what are called the first reflection points of the main speakers is a great place to start. After that, you can continue to grow. And let me stand up and show you what I was speaking about in this particular room. I met Alex about 2 years ago, and the first time I came to his home, I knew it was going to be a great project, because fortunately, he had already started, and virtually all of this room treatment was, at least some portion of it was in here, some of which has been modified in the last couple of years. So that part of the equation in this room was really easy, but many folks have none or have no clue how to do this, and I don't claim to be an expert on this, but I have been doing audio calibration for about 30 years, and I've been in all kinds of rooms. Ideally, there's several places in a theater where you need to start. The first is what's called the first reflection point, which is with a mirror trick you can figure out where that is in the room. And in this particular case, Alex has treated this with all absorptive material. The problem with using absorption all over the room is you can overly dry up a room, which really takes all the life out of it, and nothing sounds very good that way. But this is very well designed by GIK and by Alex, because this one is just absorptive. This next panel has there's a substance behind here, so it makes it act both as an absorber and a diffuser. And then the last one over here is also a different kind of one-dimensional diffusion, so that you get a great mix. And if you go around the entire room, the room is done that way. As we were first meeting outside the room, the acoustics between that room and this one are considerably different. And of course, this one was fully treated. I cannot say enough about how important room treatment is. I have been in rooms where you can put a $3,000 pair of speakers in an appropriately treated room that will easily outperform a $150,000 pair of speakers in an inappropriately treated room. It's the most important thing, and it never really changes. The good news about doing room treatment is you don't have to start off like Alex did with it all done at once. You can start off at the basic points in the room, and then as budget allows, you can continue around the room and fill in the other spaces. When I came to Alex's home the first time, neither the rear wall was here, nor that there was no door there. It was an open space of about 10,000 cubic feet. And at the time, he had two 12-inch JL Audio sub, if I recall correctly. And while they certainly would produce bass, and they were okay for music, there was no way you were going to pressurize that much space with that few subs. So over time, as he first enclosed that wall and then enclosed this one, he wanted to be able to not only experience the low frequencies, but to feel them as well. And that's all about air displacement. So he literally copied what I had in my room, and now using 8 of these Seaton F-18s, 2 in each corner. So they're about 5 decibels down at 7 hertz. They go very, very low, and they have 4,000 watts driving each of the 4 sets of subs. So not only does he get to hear the low bass, he gets to experience it. For loud bass scenes, the floor moves, the couch moves, the walls moves. No tactile response needed, tactile transducers rather needed to be able to energize the entire room.
Yeah, it's funny because if the floors are moving, I'm definitely moving too. So, and I've felt what that feels like. I mean, when the bass goes, below 10 hertz, you definitely feel it. You can feel it on your shorts or your pants or whatever it is you're wearing. You can definitely feel everything moving about. And it's crazy having, so many subs in the room. Initially, I thought, well, would this be too much? But until you actually go and you feel it, you don't know how much you really need it and how useful it is, because it's not about the sound. It's about, like we talked about, what you can feel. And feeling that bass is all a matter of being able to move as much air through the room as possible. So in a room this size, which is about 3,500 cubic feet, you need probably a minimum of at least 6 subs at 18 inches per sub to move that kind of air.
Agreed. So Alex is never one to minimize, so we have 8.
One of the things that I'd like to discuss is an audio calibration. Chuck, when you had told me that you did audio calibrations, I didn't really know what that entailed. I was used to getting video calibrations and seeing somebody come out with a computer and dial everything in and get into the sub menu or whatever it is that they do in the system. But with audio, I was thinking in my head like, well, so what, are you just changing knobs in the dial and that's it? And you're going to kind of come in and go out. Would you kind of tell everybody about what the process is of doing an audio calibration?
Sure. What makes it particularly helpful is using, in this case, the Trinnov for audio calibration. I won't go into all the gory details of all that is inside of it, but it's easily the most flexible tool that I've ever used. I actually met Scott 25 years ago when I was the marketing director for a company called Cambridge Signal Technology, and they had the original digital room correction product, which compared to what's available today was pretty remarkable. We did them in recording studios. I remember doing the BG studios down in South Florida and a number of homes and home theaters. What happened 30 years ago versus what now is available with things like the Trinnov is remarkable. It's a lot easier to fine-tune a room. The Trinnov gives so many tools and so much flexibility to be able to fine-tune based on the acoustics in the room specifically you're working on, how many people will be in the seat. It has a capability that none of the other processors do, which means you can give every seat in the room exactly the same weight if you want everybody to hear the same thing. You can have a sweet spot, a selfish spot, which is what actually we've done in this room. You have all kinds of pre-calibration options to fine-tune the system before the calibration actually ever begins. And we use the Trinnov 3D microphone, so it not only knows where the speakers are in the room, it knows in 3 dimensions. And the Trinnov has the ability to do 3D remapping. So if the speakers aren't in the exact spot they need to be in, the Trinnov will figure out the closest 3 speakers, use those 3 speakers to put the sound exactly where it needs to come from. All those tools are available in the Trinnov, and it's just by experience and playing with them. Again, I've been doing this for a long time. The Trinnov gives us all the tools we need to make the thing work. None of that really works very well, however, if I go back to what I was talking about earlier, which is no sound treatment. Fortunately, he has it. And this room is easily the best room I've ever heard in the last 30 years I've been doing this. There's nothing quite compare like it. Except, I must say, after I did his room 2 months ago, I went home and replicated the same speakers he's got. So I now have identical, same room, same speakers. The only difference is my room is on a suspended floor, so the tactile response is significantly different. I actually happen to like Alex better, but I'm not going to put concrete in my floor.
Alex, this has absolutely been an incredible experience over the past 2 days, getting to know you and your family, visiting your incredible home theater. And today we had an awesome time, man. We had a chance to go over to Atlanta Home Theater and check out an $800,000 home theater. This thing was crazy. And inside Atlanta Home Theater, they've got like 15 home theaters in their showroom. Alex, how much square feet do they have?
It was 12,000 square feet.
12,000 square foot showroom.
Yeah,
and
3 floors.
They've got everything for automation. So I'll be editing a video. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel because that video is going to be super, super cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Now, if you like these types of videos and you've got an awesome home theater, head over to my website, hometheatertours.com. You can submit yours for a possible home theater tour like this one. And also, if you're a brand and you've got a customer that has an amazing home theater, I encourage you to do the same. So if you like these videos, make sure you're subscribed to the channel because I produce weekly videos just like this on home theater tips, tours, as well as reviews. And as always, you guys be blessed, and we'll catch you in the next video.